I'm Eric, and this is Yeti Garage. Today, working on my Ford 9-inch. I'm putting it in my 62 Bel Air. So far, I've took all the brackets off the factory rear end, welded them onto this rear end so I can use the original suspension or control arms and everything to hold this rear end in there, and then I've narrowed it to the same width as the factory rear end, and then put the GM style ends on it. These are some universal cut to length shafts. They're cut. Now it's time to mount some brakes on here. So I have, here's a new center section. I need to put that in next to hold the axle shafts in, or have the axle shafts rest in this center section so I can start measuring for brackets to hold the brakes. This is a backing plate off a 4th gen F-body, so like a 98 through 02 Camaro or Firebird. This uses a 12-inch rotor, and if you have this backing plate, you have a parking brake, a 12-inch rotor, and then you can use a 4th gen Camaro or a 5th gen Corvette rear caliper. But I have these brembo calipers off like a 09 cts-v, which I think they're the same calipers off the cts-v, but I'm not positive of that. But I got these, this is the rear, this is the front. I got all 4 calipers for like 300 bucks, so you can't beat that. So I'm gonna take these rears and put them on this 12-inch rotor, make the rear brakes for this Bel Air. The issue, the main issue why it's not just a bolt up thing is that the bolt pattern to hold the calipers on, this is the Camaro one and this is the cts-v, they're different, so you can't just bolt it on. And then even if you re-drilled one of those holes or something, or made a bracket or whatever, they want to occupy the same space in relation to like the center line of the rotor here. So you can't use this caliper on that backing plate. So I'm going to have to build a mount. I got some 3/8 plate. I'm going to cut out a mount that's going to weld to the housing tube and allow this, and then this caliper will bolt to that piece of 3/8 plate and float over this rotor. And then this backing plate, rather than holding the caliper, will just retain the axle and hold the parking brake. I'm going to leave these tabs. I was thinking about cutting it off, but I have had the idea of putting a handbrake on this so I could slide the rear end. And if I wanted to do that, having another set of calipers would be the easiest way. I could put a master cylinder, a hand-operated master cylinder on the tunnel, and run another set of brake lines back here, and just put a caliper on the back side of the rotor, and I'd have 2 calipers on the rear rotor, which is how a lot of people do that. But first, let's get this center section in. I got to press some wheel studs, some studs into the axle shafts so I can put that rotor on the end of the housing and start measuring for that bracket I'm going to build to hold the caliper. Already ran into my first issue. I put the center section in the housing, and I had an axle shaft in there. And when I went to put the rotor on, I hadn't even thought about this yet, was where the rotor centers on the shaft on this, I guess you'd call it a hub. The axle shaft is larger than the rotor. So this is about 3 1/8. The rotor off that Camaro is a little over 2 3/4. It was actually 2.779. I'm sure that's some metric number. So luckily it fit. This is the long shaft, and it fit in my lathe barely. So I cut it down so that now that rotor fits on there. If you don't have a lathe, I guess you're gonna have to order if you want to do this. Order custom shafts. All the manufacturers make them. You fill out a little order form and the spline count, the length, and the what hub you want on, you know, what size you want this and what bolt pattern you want on it. This is a little bit cheaper way, these universal cut to fit ones. Or I guess you could run it down in the machine shop. They probably wouldn't hardly charge you anything to turn that down a little bit. I got to turn this one down and then get back to what I was working on. So I have both the shafts turned down and installed one of them and have a plate retaining it in, and then I put some studs into the shaft with the rotor on, a couple nuts to hold it up tight, and set the caliper on. And then I measured and went through a couple different versions of this, but then came up with a little template or a little pattern that'll weld to the tube, and then it'll have some holes here to bolt that caliper on. I'm also gonna have to make some notches in it, because here is where the T-bolt will install from this side and a nut will come from the outside to actually hold the backing plate for the parking brake on there. So I need to make a hole in this, or a notch in this mount, so that those T-bolts can install, otherwise they'd be trapped in there forever. And if I ever stripped one or broke one, then I have to cut this bracket off just to change out those T-bolts. So next, I'm going to start building this out of 3/8 plate. got the brackets all cut and cleaned up. And I bolted one to a caliper. And then I just used, I don't know if you see in there, I just folded up a blue shop towel, paper towel. This caliper still has pretty much new pads on it, so I didn't need to make up that much space to get it on there really tight. It's on there, you can't really spin it separate from the rotor. So that's holding the caliper the proper distance from the rotor. And then I'm just going to put some tacks on this bracket to the housing. And then I'll put the actual backing plate in there and the parking brake and spin it around, get that paper towel out of there, make sure nothing's hitting, and then do the other side. The caliper brackets are welded out. Now I'm going to build some brackets that'll weld to those in this area here that'll hold the parking brake cable. So I'm just use some 1/4-inch plate. Have them drawn out here. Those brackets are finished, welded on. I'm gonna try to use the factory Bel Air brake cable to actuate these parking brakes, but I'm gonna have to build some kind of tab down here to hold that cable to that little arm. That's next. So I'm trying to figure out how to get this lever needs to pull forward to engage the parking brake. So I found these. This is a drop from when I used the hole saw to cut these holes on the caliper mounting bracket. So this is the little arm from the other side, and I welded that piece right there. Then I notched just so the cable would fit in there. I think that'll work. And then you just have to get some slack and you can get it out of there. I need to make a bracket or a tab that's going to hold this brake hose to the line that'll come from here. I'll bend down. I have this piece of metal. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm going to drill a hole and then cut it and then bend it and weld it to that axle tube, and then I'll use this clip to retain the hose to this bracket I'm going to make. Okay, I got those tabs welded on, and that brake hose will sit in there like that. They're retained by the clip. And then I got to build a hard line. Goes over to here. So I have got some 3/16 stainless line, and then just a cutter and a bender. And I picked up this new flare tool. I've had problems with the regular flare tool like this you get from the auto parts store. Not making that good of a flare, so I'm gonna try this new tool, see if that helps. Brake lines are finished. I think that's the last step for fabrication on this axle. Now I just gotta take it all apart, paint everything, put it back together. It's all back together, cleaned and painted everything. Came out pretty good, especially for just a driver. It's not a show car or anything. That's it for this project. Thanks for watching.